The British Parliament, yes. The same lawmakers who once swore loyalty to the crown are reportedly preparing to do what even the monarchy itself refuses to: strip Prince Harry and Meghan Markle of their royal titles once and for all.
When the gates of Westminster swung open that morning in early 2026, it wasn't for ceremony or routine business. It hit different this time. The kind of silence that usually fills Parliament at dawn was replaced with a tension so heavy, it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Inside those ancient corridors, before most people in Britain had even stirred for their first cup of tea, something massive was already in motion. Something that reportedly made seasoned parliamentary staff freeze on the spot as the news spread like wildfire through sealed channels. What was unfolding wasn't just another political whisper, it was emergency legislation reportedly aimed at the Sussex title connected to Meghan Markle moving through Parliament at a speed nobody expected. The shock wasn't just what the content was, but how fast it was already advancing behind closed doors. And this wasn't tabloid noise or social media hype trying to stir drama for clicks. This was being described as real institutional movement, something structured, something official, something that couldn't just be ignored or brushed off anymore. By the time senior royals were properly briefed, the machinery of government had already rolled further than the palace believed possible. This entire situation is being framed as a turning point moment in modern royal history, where quiet tension, private breakdowns, and political pressure allegedly collided all at once into something far bigger than anyone expected. The stakes reportedly stretched beyond titles and family reputation. It was about the structure of the monarchy itself. The beginning of this chain reaction traces back to a moment that reportedly shifted everything behind the scenes. For years, the Sussex situation inside royal and government circles was treated like a controlled fire. Dangerous, yes, but contained within boundaries that everyone understood. It was seen as a family issue, wrapped in public drama, something messy but manageable, something that could be contained with careful messaging and time. But that perception reportedly collapsed in early 2026 when internal confidence finally cracked. According to insiders and circulating reports, a sealed briefing was delivered before sunrise to key Westminster figures, and what was inside reportedly changed the entire tone of discussion instantly. Even those who had tracked the Sussex situation for years were allegedly stunned at how far conversations had already progressed in silence. These were not inexperienced aides or casual observers. These were senior political operators who had seen constitutional pressure before, yet the reaction described was silence, shock, and hesitation all at once. That alone reportedly raised alarms. The briefing itself reportedly contained a deep constitutional analysis, not gossip, not political spin, but structured legal reasoning about whether Parliament could intervene in aristocratic titles connected to the Crown under extreme conditions. That phrase, extraordinary circumstances, became a central point of interpretation in discussions, almost like a legal doorway being carefully pushed open. It reframed the entire issue from personal dispute into something that could be argued as institutional risk. And that shift in framing reportedly changed everything about how officials began to approach the situation. Because once something becomes constitutional, it stops being just emotional or political. It becomes structural. A key question reportedly began circulating in private discussions across Westminster corridors. When does a royal family conflict stop being private and start becoming a matter of state survival and constitutional stability? That question alone reportedly unsettled many conversations. And the answer, according to what insiders suggest, was brutally simple. When Parliament decides it is, that idea alone reportedly sent ripples through every level of discussion. Within hours, quiet movement allegedly began spreading across London's political and royal advisory networks. Messages were exchanged discreetly, conversations were held behind closed doors, and the pace reportedly escalated in a way nobody inside the palace anticipated. What shocked observers most wasn't just the existence of movement, it was the speed of it. Sharp and methodical, like a system already prepared in advance and simply waiting to activate. According to insiders, the palace was caught off guard in a way that rarely ever happens, and that alone reportedly triggered internal concern at the highest level. But interestingly, the first signs of genuine alarm didn't come from Buckingham Palace itself. They reportedly began deeper inside government machinery, where officials operate away from cameras and public statements. Inside those rooms, where language is chosen carefully and every word carries institutional weight, some officials allegedly began using a phrase that immediately raised tension: constitutional emergency tied to the monarchy's credibility. That wasn't casual wording. That was escalation language. It signaled that discussions had crossed from theory into perceived institutional threat. And once that phrase entered circulation, everything reportedly changed in tone. Because in the British system, when constitutional language is applied to royal matters, it signals that the issue is no longer symbolic. It is structural and potentially destabilizing. Observers tracking the situation described the atmosphere as unlike anything seen in recent memory. What started as a title discussion reportedly evolved into a question about dormant powers, historical precedents, and legal mechanisms that had rarely, if ever, been seriously considered in modern times. And that alone added a layer of intensity that nobody could ignore. Meanwhile, palace aides were reportedly instructed to maintain strict silence. No statements, no clarifications, no defensive positioning, just a silence. And in royal environments, silence like that is never neutral. It usually signals something significant is happening behind locked doors, something still being controlled and contained. But silence also feeds speculation, and speculation in this case reportedly escalated faster than official channels could respond. Years of tension between the Sussex camp and royal institutions reportedly formed the background pressure that made this moment possible. Nothing about this came out of nowhere. There had been interviews, public statements, memoir releases, and ongoing media exposure that allegedly kept widening the gap between both sides over time. Inside government and palace advisory circles, frustration reportedly built gradually, not suddenly, until it reached a point where officials struggled to categorize the situation as purely personal anymore. Because when royal identity itself becomes part of ongoing public conflict, it stops being just about individuals. It becomes about institutional meaning. One of the core concerns reportedly raised internally involved the commercialization of royal identity while remaining connected to its symbolic authority. In simple terms, critics allegedly questioned whether a royal title could still carry constitutional weight if it was being used in ways outside traditional royal responsibility, because historically, those titles are tied to service, duty, and institutional alignment with the crown. And the tension reportedly came from this contradiction. Can symbolic authority remain intact if it is being publicly reshaped outside of royal oversight? Those questions didn't have simple answers, but they had serious implications, and they reportedly gained attention in multiple official circles. As discussions deepened, public perception also became part of the internal calculation, because legitimacy in monarchy systems is not only legal, it is also reputational. Now pause on this moment in the unfolding narrative, because public sentiment at the time reportedly played a role in shaping how all of this escalated, and this leads directly into another major turning point involving senior royal dynamics, where internal alignment reportedly began shifting in unexpected ways, particularly around figures like William and Anne, and what some insiders began referring to as the Iron Protocol. Now we get to the part of this story that reportedly sent the most profound shockwaves through palace circles, because the parliamentary discussions were one thing, but what was happening simultaneously inside the royal family itself was, according to insiders, something far more decisive. When the first leaked detail hit the inner circles of Westminster, it reportedly didn't just cause concern, it completely shifted the mood in the room in a way nobody could ignore. The idea that Prince William and Princess Anne were allegedly briefed before King Charles himself was fully informed sent shockwaves through palace veterans who understood exactly what that timing meant. Read that again for clarity, because insiders reportedly did the same in disbelief. The heir to the throne and the Princess Royal were said to have been informed before the reigning monarch had even received the complete picture. and that single fact allegedly changed the entire interpretation of the situation overnight. According to those familiar with palace dynamics, this wasn't just unusual, it was symbolic of something far deeper unfolding behind closed doors. It suggested that the matter had moved beyond informal family concern and into structured institutional response planning at the highest level. Veteran observers reportedly interpreted this as a clear signal that the situation was no longer being treated as emotional or reputational. It was now being handled like a constitutional risk scenario, and that shift in framing reportedly altered everything about how decisions were being made. Insiders suggest that from that moment onward, the entire approach changed tone completely. What was once seen as a sensitive family matter was now allegedly being managed with strategic precision, almost like an institutional defense operation quietly activating in real time. Princess Anne's involvement reportedly became one of the most defining elements of this entire phase. Known within palace circles as someone who prioritizes duty over sentiment, she allegedly approached the situation with absolute clarity and zero emotional hesitation. Staff who had worked with her for years reportedly described her stance as firm, direct, and completely unwavering. To Anne, the issue was not about personal relationships or family tension. It was about constitutional stability and the long-term survival of institutional structure. According to insiders, she repeatedly emphasized one core idea in private discussions that allegedly shaped the direction of internal debate. The monarchy cannot function if royal identity becomes disconnected from royal responsibility. That single principle reportedly carried significant weight in closed-door conversations. It reframed the entire issue into something structural rather than personal, something that demanded boundaries instead of compromise. As discussions intensified, Anne's influence reportedly grew stronger in unexpected ways. Even those who had previously seen her approach as too strict or traditional allegedly began to acknowledge the clarity she brought to a chaotic and emotionally charged situation. What some palace insiders later referred to as the Iron Protocol was allegedly her structured framework for handling the crisis. It wasn't about public confrontation or media escalation. It was about firm internal boundaries enforced through constitutional logic and institutional discipline. The idea behind it reportedly focused on controlled response, clear separation of roles, and a strict definition of what royal status does and does not allow. It was described as methodical, deliberate, and deeply rooted in institutional preservation. Meanwhile, Prince William was reportedly aligning more closely with this approach than many initially expected. Sources familiar with internal dynamics suggest he viewed the situation not only through a family lens, but through the perspective of a future monarch witnessing institutional pressure building in real time. According to insiders, William allegedly became increasingly concerned about the long-term impact on the monarchy's structure. This wasn't just about personal relationships anymore, it was about what kind of crown he would eventually inherit. There was reportedly a recurring phrase circulating in senior discussions around William's position that captured the seriousness of the moment, a line that could no longer move forward without consequence. That sentiment allegedly reflected growing concern that certain boundaries had already been crossed. Princess Catherine, widely known as Kate, was also reportedly a stabilizing presence throughout this period. While less publicly vocal in institutional debates, insiders suggest her role behind the scenes was significant in maintaining composure and balance within the broader royal response. Observers reportedly described her approach as calm, steady, and strategically grounded. Rather than escalating tension, she allegedly reinforced a sense of controlled dignity, helping shape how the situation was perceived externally and internally at the same time. In crisis terms, that distinction reportedly mattered a great deal because perception often determines legitimacy, and legitimacy is central to how institutions like the monarchy maintain authority under pressure. Together, William, Catherine, and Anne were reportedly viewed by some commentators as forming an informal alignment that quietly influenced the direction of internal planning. Not a formal alliance, but a shared convergence of perspective at a critical moment. This internal alignment reportedly became more noticeable as decisions began to move forward with increasing seriousness behind the scenes. And at the center of it all stood King Charles, reportedly facing one of the most emotionally and institutionally complex periods of his reign. Sources familiar with his private state during this time describe a monarch under immense emotional strain. On one side was his role as a father, and on the other was his duty as head of state, and the two were reportedly in direct conflict. According to insiders, Charles allegedly wrestled with a deeply painful question. Is it possible to protect both family unity and institutional stability at the same time? And reportedly, the answer he confronted internally was increasingly difficult to reconcile. As pressure mounted, the situation reportedly shifted into what observers began describing as constitutional movement rather than informal discussion. But what made it even more striking was how quietly everything was happening. The legislation in question reportedly did not advance through dramatic parliamentary scenes or public declarations. Instead, it moved through layers of procedural consultation, legal review, and carefully controlled institutional communication. This silence reportedly became one of the most powerful elements of the entire process. It created an environment where action was occurring, but visibility was intentionally limited, almost as if the system itself was operating in stealth mode. Legal experts involved in reviewing the matter were reportedly navigating extremely complex constitutional territory. They were working through centuries-old frameworks, trying to determine whether intervention in royal titles could ever be justified under extreme institutional risk conditions. The goal, according to insiders, was not simply action, it was controlled action that would not destabilize the broader constitutional structure in the process. That balancing act reportedly made every decision significantly more delicate. At the same time, palace legal teams were reportedly maintaining strict distance from direct political involvement. Their silence was not neutrality in the emotional sense. It was strategic insulation designed to protect the crown from accusations of interference. However, behind that public silence, communication between advisory circles and government figures was reportedly increasing steadily. The level of coordination, while discreet, was described as highly structured and continuous. During this period, previously dormant constitutional concepts were allegedly re-examined with renewed urgency. Legal scholars and officials were reportedly drawn into discussions that had rarely been activated in modern political history. A key question began to dominate internal debate. Does Parliament possess the authority to intervene in royal titles if it determines that institutional stability is at risk? And if so, where are the limits of that authority? That question reportedly split opinion in a way that surprised even experienced lawmakers. One side warned that such action could set a dangerous precedent, opening the door to future political interference in monarchy-related matters. The opposing view reportedly argued that failure to act in the face of prolonged institutional tension could itself represent a breakdown in constitutional responsibility. In that interpretation, inaction was not neutrality, it was risk. Historical comparisons were reportedly drawn during these debates, including references to earlier royal crises where constitutional and familial obligations collided in ways that reshaped public institutions. And now all of it was unfolding under global scrutiny, where every silence was analysed, every statement dissected, and every delay interpreted as meaningful. At the human centre of this unfolding situation were Harry and Meghan, who reportedly experienced these developments in deeply personal and destabilizing ways. According to sources close to the situation, Prince Harry had carried a lingering hope that time might eventually soften tensions and create space for reconciliation within the family structure. But the involvement of Parliament reportedly shattered that expectation entirely. The idea that the state itself was now formally examining mechanisms related to royal titles allegedly struck him with overwhelming force. This was no longer just family disagreement, it was institutional escalation, and that shift reportedly changed everything about how the situation felt on a personal level. Meghan, meanwhile, reportedly faced intensified scrutiny from both supporters and critics as debates grew louder around her public role and influence. Supporters argued she was exercising personal agency and speaking out against institutional failure, while critics claimed her actions contributed to ongoing instability within the monarchy's public image. That divide reportedly became sharper over time, fueling broader public polarization that extended far beyond royal circles. Some observers viewed the situation as an institution defending its foundations under pressure. Others saw it as an establishment resisting modern transparency and accountability. And in the middle of all that tension were two individuals experiencing consequences far beyond their control or prediction. By the time the vote approached its final stage, the atmosphere in Westminster reportedly felt unusually heavy, almost irreversible in tone. Officials inside the palace reportedly maintained an intense and controlled silence, which many interpreted not as detachment, but as the final stillness before a major institutional shift. And even those who supported intervention reportedly acknowledged privately that whatever outcome followed would not be simple or clean, because removing or altering a royal title is never just a procedural act. It is a structural event with long-lasting consequences that extend far beyond the moment the vote is counted. It is something that echoes through families, through history, and through the public understanding of what the monarchy actually is and what it is willing to do. It sits heavy over every decision, shaping how people interpret every move and every silence from the Crown in real time. Reports suggest members of Parliament, in their final discussions, increasingly framed the vote not as punishment or retaliation, but as what they called an unavoidable institutional safeguard. They described it like a duty-driven action where emotion had no place, only responsibility to the system itself. A line in the constitutional sand was drawn not out of personal hostility, but out of what they presented as duty to the Crown itself. It was framed as necessary distance between personal feeling and institutional survival, even if it carried heavy consequences. Palace aides reportedly spent the final tense hours preparing for potential international backlash, fully aware that any action tied to Harry and Meghan would spark global reaction, especially in the United States and Commonwealth nations, where public sympathy for the Sussex couple remained strong and emotionally charged. Some insiders worried the monarchy would appear cold, vindictive, and disconnected from younger global audiences. They feared the image damage could linger far longer than the decision itself and reshape how future generations see the institution. Others believed that not acting would weaken the palace's authority and undermine years of messaging about royal duty and accountability. In their view, hesitation would signal confusion at a moment where clarity was essential. Both fears were real, both carried serious risk, and neither outcome could fully satisfy everyone involved. It was a situation with no clean landing, only consequences. Then the vote reportedly came, and a new era began forming almost instantly. Public reaction exploded across Britain and beyond, split sharply in emotional direction and intensity. Some people reportedly felt relief that the institution had finally enforced boundaries it had avoided for years. To them, it looked like control and structure being restored. Others felt deep grief, seeing a family torn apart in public, a woman they believed had been failed, and a reconciliation that now seemed impossible. The emotional divide was immediate and intense. Royal historians compared the moment to the abdication crisis and other turning points in House of Windsor history, moments where duty to the Crown overtook personal ties, leaving long emotional consequences behind. The questions spread everywhere. Does the monarchy grow stronger or weaker when it enforces its rules this decisively? No one had a clear answer, not even seasoned royal observers. In the weeks that followed, a different monarchy began to take shape. It appeared quieter, more controlled, and more selective in who stood at its core. Insiders began calling it Prince William's monarchy in direction, if not in name, since King Charles still reigned. The influence of future planning was becoming more visible in real time. This vision reflected the long-discussed idea of a slimmed-down monarchy, fewer working royals, tighter boundaries, and clearer expectations tied to public service and responsibility. The Sussex situation didn't create this direction from nothing. Instead, it accelerated ideas already circulating within palace strategy discussions for years. The informal alignment between William, Catherine and Princess Anne reportedly grew stronger during this period. Their influence in shaping priorities became more noticeable inside palace decision-making. Senior aides who once pushed back against stricter approaches were now more likely to defer to Anne's judgment. Her reputation for discipline carried increasing weight during uncertain moments. Princess Catherine's role also became more significant during this time. Her calm public presence and steady image were seen as a stabilizing force during institutional pressure. In moments where the monarchy needed emotional connection with the public, Catherine reportedly became a key figure in maintaining that balance. Her consistency was seen as strategically important. King Charles, meanwhile, was described in increasingly complex and heavy terms. A monarch who waited decades for the throne, now facing challenges beyond his full control. He often spoke about unity and healing within the family, yet found himself presiding over a widening rupture. The contrast between intention and reality became more visible. The emotional weight of that situation was described by insiders as deeply personal, not just political. History will likely view his reign with complexity and mixed interpretation. At its core, this story goes far beyond individuals or titles. It raises a deeper question about what institutions are actually for and who they ultimately serve. The monarchy has survived for centuries not through perfection, but through adaptation under pressure. It has changed repeatedly when survival demanded it. From abdications to modern restructuring, each shift came with emotional cost. Real people were often caught inside decisions made for institutional survival. What reportedly happened in 2026 fits into that long pattern. Another difficult chapter in a long institutional history shaped by change and consequence. Perhaps the most important development was not the vote itself, but the alignment between government and monarchy in enforcing royal boundaries. That coordination marked a notable shift in how power was applied. It introduced new precedent that will likely be studied and debated for years, because once used, such mechanisms rarely stay unused forever. Who should define the limits of royal identity? And who should enforce them when conflict arises? And what does it mean when a democracy and monarchy align on such decisions? These questions extend far beyond palace walls. Behind all of it remains the human cost, a family under extreme pressure, trying to navigate roles that often clash with personal emotion. A father reportedly pulled between protecting his children and protecting the crown. Two responsibilities moving in opposite directions with no easy resolution. Two brothers whose relationship has reportedly broken down beyond easy repair. Whatever the cause is, the result is lasting distance and emotional damage. A woman who entered the royal world from outside it entirely, later describing her experience in painful and controversial terms. Her story remains deeply divisive and complex, and a prince shaped by intense public scrutiny, early loss, and life inside an unrelenting institution, now facing consequences that extend far beyond earlier expectations. History will not judge any of them simply. It rarely does when royalty and family collide. The uncertainty around Harry and Meghan's place in the royal structure is reportedly over. What follows will exist on entirely new terms. That clarity came at a high cost, paid through emotional strain, fractured trust, and lasting institutional change. Westminster opened before dawn in 2026, and what followed reportedly shifted the monarchy in lasting ways. The effects are still unfolding. Parliament acted. Titles reportedly changed. A family fractured further under public pressure. An ancient institution once again chose survival through sacrifice. A pattern repeated across centuries of royal history. Was it right? Was it necessary? Or did it go too far? Those answers remain open and likely will stay that way for years, because the monarchy has always survived by making difficult choices that reshape lives around it. The machinery of the crown, as one insider reportedly described it, never truly stops moving. It continues regardless of cost or consequence. If this video gave you a clearer view of what is happening inside the British royal family and why it matters beyond headlines, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the next update. Drop your thoughts below. Do you think Parliament made the right call? Or did the monarchy cross a line it can never come back from? This conversation matters just as much as the story itself. We'll see you in the next one.